Snow drifted across the open plains like pale ash from some old celestial fire, settling over the world with a hush so complete it felt almost sacred. Dawn had barely broken, yet the land already wore its quiet grief, fences iced in white, the barn roof sagging under fresh powder, the wind whispering along the eaves as though soothing someone unseen. In the middle of all that stillness walked Luda Blackthorn, his broad shoulders hunched against the cold, his breath rising in thin curls that vanished before they reached the sky. He moved as a man does when he has grown accustomed to silence, not because he likes it, but because it is the only companion who never flinches at his presence. The snow creaked beneath his boots, but even that small sound felt borrowed, as though he were trespassing through the morning rather than living inside it. And despite the endless stretch of land he owned, Luda felt a familiar certainty settle over him. He had never been so alone. A year was not supposed to feel like forever, yet after Marla left him, time had become a strange, viscous thing. She hadn't walked out quietly, she'd walked out furious, slamming the door so hard the hinges cracked. But the true blow fell after, the lies she scattered across town like seeds tossed to hungry crows. She claimed he was incomplete, a man unable to father children, a husband in title only. Within days, Luda felt the shift, how glances lingered too long, how voices lowered when he entered, how even old friends waited for him to break under the weight of her accusation. Pride kept him upright, but shame poisoned every breath. And though he tried to remind himself that lies die eventually, this one refused to. It shadowed him in saloons, echoed behind him on church steps, whispered through conversations he wasn't meant to hear. Sometimes, when night pressed too close, Luda feared Marla's words had carved themselves into him deeper than truth ever could. Most winters, Luda filled the ranch with noise, hired help, visiting neighbors, music around the hearth. But this year the house felt hollow, its silence roaming like a restless ghost. The only other voice belonged to Crowder Tate, an old foreman with a stiff back and a sharper tongue. Crowder tried to coax him out of his misery, urging him to hire someone, anyone, for the upcoming holiday chores. The cattle needed tending, the kitchen needed more than coffee and canned beans, and even a lonely man deserved a warm meal on Christmas. Luda attempted refusal, but practicality spoke louder than pride. He finally agreed, though he expected nothing more than temporary intrusion, some brisk cook from town who would keep her eyes down and her questions to herself. He prepared for discomfort. He did not prepare for grace. She arrived just after sunrise, crossing the final stretch of snow-covered ground with the ease of someone accustomed to winter's rules. A young native woman, no older than 20, moving with a quiet dignity that made the cold seem less bitter. Her braids, long and dark, rested against a cloak trimmed in rabbit fur. She carried a pack of herbs, dried meats, and a calm that felt almost out of place against the wind's sharp cry. When she reached the porch, she lowered her hood and offered a soft greeting. Her name was Pony Whitefeather, and for reasons Luda didn't fully grasp, the world seemed to still for a heartbeat after she spoke. He nodded awkwardly, aware of how stiff his own voice sounded in comparison. But Pony's gaze held no judgment, only gentle curiosity, as though she were reading the land, the sky, and the quiet man before her with equal respect. Luda wondered when he had last been looked at without pity. She went straight to the kitchen, warming the hearth within minutes. Luda lingered in the doorway watching her work. She handled ingredients the way some people handle music. Softly, deliberately, with a confidence that made even the simplest motions feel meaningful. He found himself unable to leave, though he feared staying might expose whatever sadness still clung to him like smoke. But Pony asked no questions. She only smiled mildly and continued chopping roots, humming an old tune that drifted through the room like embers rising from the fire. Her presence altered the house in ways Luda could not articulate. Rooms that once felt abandoned now held a quiet pulse, as if the walls themselves exhaled gently for the first time in months. And even though he tried to maintain the distance he thought he needed, he found his feet returning to the kitchen far more often than necessity demanded. Over shared meals and long evenings, bits of her story surfaced. She had lost most of her family during a fever that swept through her village. Her voice carried no bitterness when she spoke of it, only a softness that hinted at deep wounds wrapped carefully in acceptance. Luda listened, unsure how to comfort her without overstepping. Yet her composure sparked something inside him, a realization that sorrow, when held tenderly, did not have to harden into despair. He wondered if she sensed the same brokenness in him. Perhaps she did, for she never pressed him for details, never tried to unravel the knots he had tied himself into. She simply existed beside him with a steadiness he had forgotten how to trust. And slowly, without intention, Luda began leaving small offerings, an extra stack of firewood beside the hearth, a repaired kettle handle, a warmed blanket draped over her chair after the night wind grew sharp. Aponi noticed each gesture with a soft gratitude that never embarrassed him. Her silence became a kind of understanding between them, an agreement that healing did not need to be spoken aloud to be real. He found himself watching her when she didn't know, marveling at how easily she moved through his home, how naturally her presence softened the edges of his solitude. He wondered when admiration had begun turning into something deeper, something dangerous to a man who no longer trusted his own worth. On Christmas Eve, a blizzard swirled outside, coating the world in swirling silver. Aponi prepared a simple feast, trout roasted with herbs, cornbread still steaming from the pan, juniper tea fragrant enough to warm the bones. They sat close to the fire, the glow flickering across their faces in shades of amber. For the first time in months, Luda allowed himself to feel, not fear, not shame, but a kind of quiet yearning he'd believed beyond his reach. Aponi's laughter, soft and rare, melted something inside him that winter had nearly claimed. After supper he produced a small carved wooden bird, a gift he had shaped with trembling hands. She took it gently, tracing the wings with her fingertips as though it were something sacred. "You made this?" she whispered. He nodded, unable to speak. Something unspoken shimmered in the air between them, fragile yet undeniable. Luda wondered if she felt the same warmth rising between them, or if he merely hoped she did. The days that followed unfolded with a subtlety that felt almost magical. Aponi walked beside him during morning chores, her presence turning even simple tasks into moments he wished would linger. Sometimes she caught him staring, and instead of looking away she held his gaze, with softness, never mockery. And in those seconds Luda felt something inside his chest thaw. He wondered if a man could really begin again, if affection could heal wounds carved by lies. Yet just as hope began to take shape, fear whispered its old threats. What if he was broken beyond repair? What if the lie had rooted deeper than truth? The answer came on a morning bright with brittle cold. Aponi stood by the gate, her cheeks flushed with something other than winter. She called his name and he felt the world narrow to the space between them. "Luda," she began, her voice trembling, "I must tell you something." He braced himself, fear flickering like a shadow on his soul. She stepped closer. "I am with child." His breath left him in a single shudder. The old lie surged up, clawing through him with all its former viciousness. But then she reached for his hand, her eyes steady, full of absolute trust. And in that moment, truth shattered the lie like sunlight breaking through thin ice. The world tilted, flooded with a joy so fierce he nearly wept. He gathered her into his arms as if afraid she might vanish, whispering her name against her hair, feeling the weight of shame fall away piece by brittle piece. He wondered how one woman, one gentle, patient, stubborn woman, could return him to himself with nothing more than honesty and love. Spring came with rain that tasted of renewal. On a night when thunder murmured like distant drums, their son was born, tiny, strong-lunged, and impossibly perfect. Luda held him with reverence, marveling at the miracle in his arms. The child's cry felt like a declaration, silencing every whisper Marla had ever spread. But Luda no longer sought vindication. Truth lived in the small warm bundle against his chest, in the exhaustion-softened smile Aponi gave him from her bed, in the quiet pride expanding within him like a sunrise. He was no longer a man defined by rumors but by love, and by the family he had once believed fate denied him. That night, after the midwife left and the storm softened to a gentle hum, Luda sat beside Aponi, their sleeping son nestled between them. The fire cast a golden halo across the room, illuminating the carved cradle he had finished just days before. Aponi reached for his hand, her touch feather-light. "You see," she whispered, "a heart can learn to breathe again." He nodded, unable to speak past the swell of emotion. His eyes drifted to the child, then to the woman who had rewritten every truth he thought unchangeable. The man he had been, the man crushed by lies, felt distant now like a shadow belonging to someone else. In his place sat a father, a husband, a man reborn from winter's harshest edges. Long after the lamps went dim, Luda remained awake, listening to the soft breaths of the two people who had saved him without grand gestures or proclamations. Only patience. Only kindness. Only love that grew in silence, in small moments, in shared burdens. He felt the future waiting just beyond the next dawn, uncertain yes but no longer frightening. And as the last ember glowed, he whispered a promise to the quiet room, to protect this fragile joy, to nurture it, to become the man they saw him as even on days he faltered. Outside, the rain eased into a hush as though the night itself blessed the vow. And though their story would stretch far beyond that spring, this chapter ended with a fullness that needed no words, just the soft breathing of a newborn, the warmth of two souls finally at peace, and the quiet certainty that even the coldest winters eventually surrender to gentle hands brave enough to offer warmth.